Cool. So everyone's here, right? Yeah. Just read out the motion once, and after that, then you can proceed with this. Sorry? Just read out the motion once, please.
Oh, this house regrets the shaming of Matt Taylor.
Okay. And on the motion, we invite the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
You pass us.
So you just said that it's really actually that's deep. Yeah.
Recently, when Matt Taylor was publicly shamed by the feminist movement, they did three things. Number one, how they devalued the artistic expression of individuals and how do they portray it as a whole. Secondly, and how they regress the feminist movement as a whole. And thirdly, and how they shift discourse about nudity. Before that, let's go a few clarification. What did Matt Taylor do? Matt Taylor actually wore a shirt or t-shirt, I forgot, that actually showed women being naked or women in bikinis. Yeah. Because of that, feminist movement decided that they want to publicly shame rather than go through legal means, Mr. Speaker. This side of the house goes to the stance that because you are a social movement, we don't think that you should put your legitimacy and put your morals just because of you think it's good. How do we value artistic expression, and where do we allow this in those circumstances? We already have that in status quo. So, Mr. Speaker, let's look at number one. Things that is very sacred to you and how you portray it. That is how art is being portrayed in status quo. Sit down. I just started. And how art, we can already see in the status quo, or something that's very much, there's something very much subjective. Meaning here, it is not something that's very objective. So how you perceive art as to be is something is very much more sacred to you. It is how you perceive it to be. But second of all, we think, where do you allow this in status quo? We already allow dark humor where you make fun of black people because we don't think it's a derogatory thing to begin with. But second of all, we also allow art in order for you to express your expressions, because we recognize that that is your way for you to actually forego all your kinds of expressions and how you respect art. You take it with sit down. But thirdly, because we think that when you use the word nigger, it doesn't actually create any physical or mental harm, ladies and gentlemen. It is as the same and in this case of Matt Taylor, when he actually wore that kind of shirt, it doesn't actually regress the feminist movement as whole. The action that the feminist movement took in order to publicly shaming these kinds of Matt Taylor, that's the action should be condemned by individuals. Because what happened as a whole, holistically, is that it regressed the feminist movement as a whole. But secondly, we think if you talk about how people perceive this, how will people perceive this as a whole? We think how people will perceive this feminist movement is as individuals who are overreacting as a whole. How it is harmful in instances where we already allow women to wear burqa, we already allow women to wear hijab. Have you seen any men actually opposing women to even do so? No, Mr. Speaker. And to all those circumstances, why is sometimes by virtue of you being a woman, you need to be nitpicky just because a man is wearing a woman, and just because a man is wearing a shirt with bikini, Mr. Speaker? We don't think so. But third of all, let's that level to it. And how about you? This person, when he wears when he wears these kinds of bikini shirts, it actually doesn't create any third-party harm to even begin with, nor mentally, nor physically, Mr. Speaker. Because of that principle, it doesn't create any third-party harm. We think it is okay that for this individual to actually wear these kinds of clothes, Mr. Speaker. And also, all those reasons, then we go my second argument before that. Yes, sir.
Sir, in status quo, we censor the word nigger in radio airways, even in movies, because we acknowledge that there's a potential offense there. Are you now saying that individuals have a carte blanche freedom to express themselves however they want, even if it's potentially offensive?
Right. Number one, we don't actually censor the word nigger. That's why you can see a lot in US even begin with people using the word nigger. But even if so, if you're talking about how countries which only censor the word nigger they even begin with, that's actually countries which are conservative in nature. In debates, we have to debate in Western liberal democracy, where even the word nigger has already been homogenized because of 2 times all these kind of things. Second argument, firstly, how it is not the place of the feminist to shame the Matt Taylor, and there's no legitimacy being given to the social movement to even begin with, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, they are only a social movement to even begin with. Secondly, they never have a legitimacy to push their morale upon members of society that by virtue of you being a man, you shouldn't discriminate women. You shouldn't discriminate women by wearing a clothes. Which shows women's wearing bikini to begin with. We think it's immorally wrong to do so. We think, where do we draw the line where this principle plays in well? Because the yardstick that we've drawn to you is that we shouldn't do these kinds of things because it doesn't create any third-party harm. But secondly, we think they don't even have any rights to do so. They don't even have any rights to publicly shame this individual and move this individual down towards their social strata. Sit down. When what happens here, we can see the insights just go now, the second level to it, and how we can see how cultural feminism works. Muslims, feminists which are Muslims, already wear burqas, already wear hijabs to even begin with. No man shall have opposed that because we respect. That's your religion, and those are the things that you feel very much sacred to you. It is tantamount in art, because art is as the same, because it's very much sacred to you and how you self-portray yourself to even begin with. But third of all, how will this redress the feminist movement as a whole? Number one, what will the perception of individuals on the ground perceive this? What is that? Number one, they will perceive feminist movement as vicious. Second of all, they will perceive feminist movement as non-inclusive individuals, and how this is a form of feminist movement being belligerent to even begin with. How will this regress? Number one, how they are because the perception, what happens is that these individuals are going to individuals are belligerent and very much violent in nature. So what happens that this perception is bad towards these people, because what happens now is that individuals on the ground will perceive that the feminist movement as a whole doesn't respect art and doesn't respect that things that is very much sacred to them. But third of all, what should they better do if they want to say, oh, we're not helping the feminist movement as a whole? We think it is enough feminist movement to forego campaigns and do all these kinds of things to forward their cause. We think it is not enough, but also if it is not enough, we're willing to subsidize their ideology and all those kinds of things to forward their cause much better. Lastly, this is the last thing I want to talk about, and how you shift discourse about unity. The problem here, because they have shamed Matt Taylor, you shift the focus of what should be done. If you are not okay with individuals portraying feminists as something that if you're not okay with Matt Taylor wearing a bikini shirt, you think what happened there? You should go towards legal. You should go towards legal means. You should go towards legal discourse and all those kinds of things. We don't think you should be belligerent in those kinds of circumstances towards using acts of terror, publicly shaming Matt Taylor and moving him down to his social strata. We think you could be much more rational in those circumstances to go towards legal discourse and all those kinds of things. So why is this bad holistically? So all the things that the feminist movement is trying to fight for, they're trying to fight for more rights and all those kinds of things will be regressed as a whole because of this shaming part, Mr. Speaker. For all those reasons, side urges support the motion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Maybe. At the start of opening opposition, what we want to make clear is very simple. Is the shirt sexist? Yes, it is. The very fact that Matt Taylor apologized when it comes to what shirt he wore shows that he concedes very much to the fact that it's sexist. So just because they say something of an amorphous art means it's not an excuse for an argument. So what the debate essentially becomes is we contest on the effects of sexism and whether or not it should be shamed by any group of society, and to what extent, or whether we call it the fact that we are calling them out is something that is good or bad. Here's the real sequence of events that are going to highlight for you before they go on with their arguments. So firstly, this Matt Taylor, he wore a shirt where he was supposed to be in a conference that celebrates the landing of a space probe in a comet. This is celebrating the advancement in the astrophysicist industry and celebrating a landmark or a cornerstone when it comes to astrophysics. So the shirt was created by a woman, and the very fact that it was tweeted by a feminist and highlighted that it was sexist, that feminists got death threats, that feminists got the kinds of things, the kind of threats that was very problematic, and more importantly, Matt Taylor also got somewhat shamed. The important thing to realize here it is sexist. So for them to say it's art is simply wrong. Three responses to whatever that they said. The first thing that they said was that we don't censor songs such as like people saying nigger in the radio. That's inherently false. The very fact that we have things such as radio edits in things such as songs shows the very fact that we censor a lot of things when it comes to the public domain. Not just allow these kind of the words to actually be perpetuated in the public in the first place. The second thing that they said was that there's no third party harm because it is art. The very fact that some people took some response to it or some people took offense to it shows that there's obviously some third party harm when it comes to identifying yourself as a woman or even identifying yourself to the images that's actually perpetuated by the industry, especially when it's inherently sexist in nature. So their claim there is no third party harm is simply wrong, but to the extent that there's no third party harm, we think that the kind of response that actually has shows that there already is. The third thing that they said was that there's no response to the kind of shame, how it shames him. So if it is sexist, then there's all the reason to actually shame him. That's how discourse actually works in the first place. When someone says something bad, you respond with something even worse. So we think that that's the kinds of things that happen within status quo, and we think that they mischaracterize the kind of shirt as art. So we think that's problematic. Two arguments for you today. What is the STEM industry generally like and how it perpetuates the kinds of sexism that is actually in status quo? But secondly, what after effects in terms of shaming and how it's problematic within the industry. So firstly, when it comes to the STEM industry or the astrophysicist industry, what is that you see a large amount of male dominance or a large amount of male in terms of over the kind of amount of people who are female astrophysicists or who are female in nature. That's why you only see one girl when it comes to interstellar. So we think that the result of the innate sexism that exists within the realms of math and science and astrophysics shows the kind of things that is actually escaping when it comes to the kinds of interaction that you have with your fellow colleague, when it comes to things such as your friends and family. But when it comes to conversations in the workplace, right? What essentially here is very subtle but very important things you need to know. Things like your conversations. How do you describe a certain woman? It's far different when you compare that to how you are supposed to talk in real life. We think these kind of things are astrophysicists escape from these kind of things because they know that it's inherently a male-generated or male-dominated society industry where oftentimes you actually interact with male the same way, and there's no reason the only reason women do not go into these industries in general is because they're intimidated by the fact that these kind of subtle influences or subtle sexism exist when it comes to the industries. So we think that's fundamentally problematic, especially when there's no such checks and balances when it comes to women being able to say call themselves out in the public or when it comes to the industry itself. The point here is this: with the shirt that reflects this kind of sexism, it reflects the way in which it reflects the way in which this kind of sexism is prevalent, and there's a subtle effects when it comes to how people wear this kind of shirts in the first place. The kind of shirts that he wore would be problematic, especially when it comes to formal events, when it comes to when it comes to a conference that celebrates certain important events that happen in society. Any formal event will have you wear office wear or have you wear a plain shirt, but the very fact that he doesn't know that you cannot wear a shirt with a naked body on it shows the kind of things that people get away with in the industry. We think that's fundamentally problematic. But before that, Vera.
Okay, see, can you please tell us that how by publicly antagonizing and vilifying a particular character which is coming from a dominant spectrum of your scientists, you would change that dominance and you would interact with them better?
We think that's not our burden to actually say anything, but we simply say that these kind of images are extremely damaging to the kinds of things that happens in status quo, and we think that's enough of it. Secondly, let's talk about shaming and discourse. What happens when we talk about shaming, or the after effects of shaming was very simple. We think what we have learned from society or the discourse that has happened is that we understood the kinds of conversations that exist when it comes to describing sexism and the astrophysics industry together. The very fact that people were willing to excuse the innate sexism that exists within these industries simply for the fact that there was a space probe that landed on a comet shows the kind of excuse that men or women were willing to put forth in order to ignore the kinds of things that are that are perpetuated within the society. We think that's fundamentally wrong. But more importantly, when it comes to things like this course, the very fact that he got shamed allowed people to see the kind of things that happen in status quo, where we ignore the kinds of things that happen, and we ignore formality when it comes to how we are supposed to treat women, simply because there's a certain male dominance when it comes to how we are supposed to treat women. At the end of the day, the important thing you need to realize is this: the astrophysicist industry is very male dominated, and the very fact that they get away with this is problematic. Calling the Matt Taylor out because of this is something that is important, because it highlights the kinds of innate sexism that exists within our industries, and that is important for us to grow when it comes to things such as discourse, and when it comes to things such as understanding how the kinds of innate sexism exist and how it's continuously perpetuated. And that's the kinds of things that we want. At the end of the day, this important motion must absolutely stand.
We thank you for the session and invite the deputy panelists.
It was very easy for Matt Taylor to come up and publicly give his apology, getting systematically targeted by feminists, them conceding that these people got things like death threats and a lot of offenses by not only the feminists towards Matt Taylor, but towards the person who also made the shirt. We think this is the form of offenses that this side is confirming and accepting as something we should do, as something we should not regret. We never believe vigilantism is a form, or we never believe that vigilantism is something we should condone, especially from people with no kinds of certifications or legal authority over other people in our society, people like feminists. Before I give you my argument, firstly, I'm going to rebut a few things. Firstly, he told us how, in status quo, we already censor the word niggers, and which is why we shouldn't go on to accepting things of artistic expression. Apart from the millions of Eminem songs that do have these words, fine. Let's assume they're right and give you many more parallels of this. We allow the arting industry to paint so many portraits of women being nude and that rich man to put it on his mansion's wall. We allow so many kinds of nude modeling of women wearing these kinds of bikinis or scintillating clothes, yet putting it on other clothes so that people can wear and express this openly. We don't think that this particular situation is any different from the other things we allow in so many other industries. They were very ignorant and only rebutted the example behind this, not the form of argument. Sit down, sir. But then what did my first speaker tell you? He told you that this was a form of artistic expression, and the thing about artistic expression is that it does not have to have an objective benefit. Art is something completely subjective, and if I as an individual see this certain benefit in doing this, then I should be allowed to do so. I don't have to tell people that benefit. I owe no obligation to them to do so. I should be allowed to do my own freedoms. Your first argument, how there's a male dominance in the science industry. Firstly, they never did well. This doesn't justify the public shaming by feminists. This is why the second argument by my first speaker was never responded to. And I'm going to tell you why my first speaker was not only large, but largely important in this debate. This is why you push them even further, you make discourse even further. It's harder to solve this problem of male dominance. When the feminists come up and take this offensive stance and they can no longer play the victim's narrative in which they played their whole fight of getting equality, then number one, they go against their own principles of playing the victim's narrative in terms of fighting for all these rights and legislations. No, thank you, sir. But more than that, you make them seem as if they're the predators, offending people. It's harder for us to have talks with them. It's harder for us to accept them as feminists, especially when they concede that there's a power problem of male dominance happening. No, thank you, sir. But no, thank you. But more than that, we tell you that there's an organic change already happening. This is the stance coming from OG. We don't think that we have to change anything, but we do not think that things like Matt Taylor wearing this sexist shirt was particularly offensive to begin with. We think that you always have to do, we think that the feminists were ever overreacting towards this, and we think that there are always kinds of jokes that you have to imply to make the society integrate even better. No, thank you, sir. For example, which is why we have all these kinds of racist jokes, and which is why you have like comedians coming out loud and making jokes about racial stereotypes, but they're not confirming this because everybody knows that they're not actually confirming this, because they believe it, but because we'd rather make a joke of it, and after that accept ourselves to embrace the other gender or other race even better. This is why it's beneficial. But the second rebuttal to this is that artistic expression applies everywhere, not only toward, this is why they only contextualize their case within the science industry and the subtle sexism within this system. Artistic expression is not your duty towards this industry, it's towards yourself, it's towards the society as a whole. No, thank you, sir. More than that, they told us, he focused a lot on his speech telling us how this is a formal or an office event. This is not an argument against feminists, it's an argument against formality. By all means, the bosses can fire him or whatever, or impose a dress code, but we don't think that the feminists should come up and publicly shame him. This is what I'm against. Before I go on to my one argument, last one.
Sir, if you think that he shouldn't have gotten away with it and that these people can look for legal avenues, even if that was possible, what legal avenues are you fighting for? Because even if you bring it to court, it'll still be public at the end of the day.
Okay, no, for one, I don't believe that he should be tried for this, but assuming your characterization that he should, then you can bring him to legal avenues and try to try him in courts of for laws against public indecency, or you can apply for these kinds of things. However, we do not believe that it's wrong. You can try all you want. We're still defending his action. First argument, why an individual has no obligation to mediate social views. I believe I am an individual who deserves freedoms and liberties, and it's not my duty to conform to your populist ideas, no matter how populist they may be. Which is why, if a woman wears a miniskirt, we don't punish her, we punish the rapist. That woman is not accountable for any kinds of views that people have onto her, and therefore should be free to do whatever she wants and not conform to your views. It's perfectly fine to do actions which are legally acceptable, but not socially acceptable, which is why we allow things like drinking alcohol or smoking. This is because we don't have to conform towards social views, but only stay within the legal boundaries which have already been set up. If you support shaming Matt Taylor, then you're being a protectionist body. Two harms to this. The first harm is that you don't empower decisions, but you make them on behalf of your people. You are no longer a democratic state, but a very protectionist one, forcing people to conform to your morals and imposing your kinds of values onto them, not allowing them to make their own decisions. The second harm is that now you show the state is being complicit and inconsistent, because now you show that it's fine to commit forms of public indecencies, which is why it's okay for you to go and kiss your girlfriend in public, even though it might offend some people, but you at the same time you support shaming Matt Taylor. This is when the state is complicit and decreases their legitimacy and jurisdiction in doing more of their legislation. But more than that, we were all born in this world by virtue of the birth lottery. We never chose or consented to our gender because of this form of subjectivity. No individual has any obligation to anyone from any gender. Feminists cannot impose values as morals onto other unconsenting people, especially not to a group of feminists who self-proclaim themselves and have this form of social movement. You have no obligation towards them. At the end of the day, they're just another group of people in our society. What are the harms to this? The harm is that you cause an illegitimate form of double standard. In a world where women can wear shirts portraying shirtless lifeguards on their bikinis, or pictures of topless pictures of Justin Bieber flexing his muscles and showing his tattoos on their t-shirts and wear them in public, is in this exact world where we tell you we accept a world of people portraying nudity for terms of artistic expression. And the worst thing is that men accept this and do no forms of public shaming towards women instead. If feminists were truly fighting for equality, then they would also oppose the gray area offenses to both genders, and not only oppose Matt Taylor for that one shirt he wore showing those scintillating pictures to his own private event, but they would also oppose the many things we fight for in the society, where we live in a liberal democracy that accepts these liberal values and forms of artistic expression.
In my speech, I'll answer two very important questions that summarizes the opening half of the debate, which is one, did he deserve to be called out for what he wore and what he did? And secondly, was what ensued from the fact that he got shamed something that was positive or negative to a society? And I'll integrate my rebuttals and my arguments into this. Specifically, my positive material is going to focus on the designer behind the shirt and why what we saw from the fact that she designed this shirt was what we call feminist condoned sexism or female condoned sexism, and it's something that we think was appropriate for us to highlight in this form of a scenario to begin with. The first question, did it deserve to be called out? And let's look at the excuses that side opening government gave us. One, this is artistic, and therefore, because art is subjective, we think it's something that nobody can generally call out. That is very bad logic, because one, we think that even bigotry is something that we don't socially accept as acceptable behavior. It marginalizes many individuals, but we call it out and we don't let it hide behind the veneer of it being artistic or just because you can do it, just because it's legal for you to do so anyway. But two, if the idea that you can have these forms of humor, the fact that you go to a Jimmy Carr, what is it called? A Jimmy Carr event, you don't generally go there and you go there under the veneer of satire because you know that's what you're consenting towards. It's appropriate for the event because that's the meeting of the minds and the implicit contract between the person that's presenting and the person that's actually attending that event to begin with. That's why nobody repeats Jimmy Carr jokes outside the Jimmy Carr event, Mr. Chair, and that's why we think it's important. But what is important to take note here is that Matt Taylor felt that it was appropriate for an occasion where millions of people were watching, for him to wear a shirt that reflected nudity on women. A subject that is not just incredibly touchy, but people are severely divided and polarized on, because he thought that he could get away with the lack of sensitivity to the concept of nudity. He could get away with that very slipshod attitude of his, and that kind of lack of respect is the problem. It not just shows inappropriate behavior towards women, it shows a lack of seriousness in the way he believes gender equality and gender identity works between men and women themselves. And that's the reason why he apologized. That's why we don't think this debate can revolve around whether or not the shirt was sexist. The debate needs to go on from that point and decide whether or not he should have been shamed and to what degree he should have been shamed and the actual shaming that actually took place. And we think that's where side opening government dropped the ball. The last thing he came up here and told us was it's not legal for us to be able to do this. They should have pursued legal alternatives. But that's again quite disingenuous because we think society relies a lot on the court of public opinion to address certain problems when it comes to social attitudes. We call out bigots for who they are because we want people to realize, we want people to discuss and realize that what he did was wrong, so that kind of behavior is never emulated. Their arguments are basically a defense of freedom for freedom's sake. The fact that this is allowed is something that I should be perfectly within my right to do. That gives us a perfectly equal right to criticize what you're saying and to call you out for being a bigot, Mr. Chair. So we don't think that arguments are mutually exclusive anyway. So we think that's problematic. They then came on to say, but there are now double standards. What if a woman wore a shirt of a half-naked man? What they are not paying respect to here is women have been the victims of oppression in a society, not men. And therefore, it makes it that much worse for you to portray women as just that. But two, if you really want us to defend the fact that we think it may be inherently sexist to wear a half-naked shirt or half-naked a man on your shirt for a formal event, we're more than willing to agree that we would have called that out as well. So we don't think there are double standards here in the hypothetical world that side-opening government is living in. All in all, Mr. Speaker, the first question in this debate is, did he deserve to be called out on the sheer fact that it was sexist? Yes, it was. What he did was wrong, and the call of public opinion, and people have a right to point out that what he did was wrong and he should have apologized. Insofar as that, we think this debate have lost. But the second question they refused to then answer was, what was the good that came out of the fact that we called him out? And the specific things that we were able to highlight, not just about our demographies, but certain attitudes of our people that defended him. And here's where we came out and gave you these arguments. One, we told you that the fact that the kinds of disproportionate number of men within these industries means that the aggregate kinds of communication you have between colleagues, the kinds of behavior you display within your working environment is innately sexist itself, which means you can make nude and crude comments about women simply because there's a lack of women there to correct everything you can and should be saying. And that's problematic because it is the kinds of innate sexism that makes women less likely to enter these forms of industries because they think they're going up against a wall of men who are innately sexist and believe they can be excused just because they landed a probe or a comment. And that's problematic. That's the harm from their model because you disenfranchise an entire gender of individuals from believing that these industries are viable careers for them simply because they believe the kinds of innate sexism that came out. That's the first thing we came up here and told you. But secondly, the fact that the number of people that defended Matt Taylor by sheer virtue of his accomplishment was even more disgusting. It allowed us to recognize that kinds of entitlement mentality that pervades men anyway. That if we do something good for the breakthroughs of our society, we should then be excused for the minute mistakes we then make. We can then be excused for the innately subtle sexist behavior behaviors we then display within society. It allows us to recognize that this is the problem with society now. That sexism has evolved beyond just believing that women and men are unequal, but to give this man a break, man, he just landed a comment on a probe. Let him say one or two sexist things if he wants. That's the insidious nature of sexism we saw from people that responded. That's why even though he got shamed, the number of the death threats that the feminist, the person that tweeted the tweet, was even that much higher. The fact that she called him out for saying, dude, that was an inappropriate shirt for you to wear to an event was a reflection of how our society is divided into demographics of people who are innately bigoted in the way they see things. Before I go on, yes, Mira.
Would publicly shaming Matt Taylor change the subtle sexism?
No, the debate is about whether we should have called him out. And we're telling you, we should have called him out because not only did we do what we do was right, we were able to identify the types of things that plague society. And with that identification comes the ability for us to realize and to modify what we can do to fix these problems. That's a natural conclusion of the debate and discussion argument, Mr. Chair. But the third thing is that what we also then saw was people defending Matt Taylor as the shirt was designed by a woman. Therefore, we think it's something that's plausible because if she designed it, it clearly cannot be sexist to begin with. What it does highlight is it allows us to advance the debate on sexism to not just obvious forms of sexism, but it allows us to move on to things like why people have entitled mentalities that allow them to subtly excuse sexism. It allows them to realize that if a woman says something that's sexist, or if a woman is the one that created the shirt, clearly that must be inappropriate. That must be excusable on part of Matt Taylor to begin with. And that's why we think the shaming was important. It created discussion within society that was not just centric to very general sexism debates or discussions on sexism. It allowed us to understand the innate problems of an entire industry where 95% of the people are male. It allows us to understand the entitlement mentality among men who believe they can get away with sexism. It allows us to understand the entitlement mentality among people who believed that just because a woman created the shirt, that clearly must be excusable behavior. Allowing us to identify these things was the result of these forms of shaming, and we would have done it all over again. We think it's an important public benefit for us to identify people's mistakes. It's important for us to progress from this point onwards. We can only hope that good comes out from this debate. For all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Deputy, for the conversation. To begin this second half of this debate, we invite any member of the
Ladies and gentlemen, we think like it's quite a fact that the shirt the guy was wearing, it was pretty sexist. Like it was perceived to be sexist, not by all women, by a significant spectrum of a woman. The part of side of woman that is trying to create a dominant culture, a dominant narrative that what a woman should be, ladies and gentlemen. They are not fighting for all women, but they are fighting for a successful woman, for a corporate woman, for a CEO woman. That's a sort of perception, and that's the sort of thing that we should fight in this debate, right? We think, could we deal with it better? Could we mitigate the harm of that sexism better in a more fashionable manner, which was more acceptable, and we created actual change? Yes, we could. Because by publicly shaming, alienating, and vilifying that particular character, we didn't get any specific benefit, ladies and gentlemen. That's what they have been refusing to do and tell us. They didn't tell us, they didn't give us any tangible benefit. They didn't give us what actual change it has implemented. They didn't tell us what we gained from publicly shaming them. If there is no tangible outcome from publicly shaming them, it would have been equivalent to not publicly shaming him, but still the problems that you have are going to remain under your paradigm and our paradigm as well. There is, and then gentlemen, I want to talk to you about two things in my speech. Firstly, I want to talk to you about the perception of feminism and why is it an important thing and why is it something that we should care about, ladies and gentlemen. Right. But secondly, I'm going to talk to you about the feminist dominant narrative and dominant culture, and that's why something we should avoid. Before that, a few rebuttals, right? Let's look at the idea of creating debate on the system. Firstly, Kana never told us why there already is no debate. We think that there already is a debate. They always fight for women and they always discuss female issues, ladies and gentlemen. So you are not initiating the debate. Now you're shifting the focus from the debate that already exists. So now, instead of fighting for sexual harassment in the workplace, instead of fighting for income inequality, the more important issues, now you're shifting the focus to what a man was wearing, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the society, instead of focusing on the actual problem that exists, is thinking about what that guy was wearing, ladies and gentlemen. This is a sort of harm that you're bringing to the social discourse that you're bringing to the table. We don't think that shift of focus is something beneficial, it's something that you would do. Get the whole idea. Here is how my positive contribution comes to this debate as well, right? He come here and said there is a subtle discrimination within that particular thing. Now I'm going to tell you why now you're limiting the interaction and normalization of women within the workforce even further. See, the guy never intended to be a patriarch. He never intended to do sexism. Now you're victimizing him for something that he hasn't done. Now you're vilifying his character. You're undervaluing his achievement. Now he's paying for something that he never did, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's particularly harmful in this specific scenario because now you're creating an oversensitive environment at the workplace. Now you're creating an oversensitive man. Now the man would only focus and hang out with men because any other female corporate person is so sensitive. Any remark that you make, even if it's intentional or is not intentional, they're gonna get offended and you're gonna be publicly shamed. Under your paradigm, women are gonna be more alienated. They're gonna be more stigmatized. Now they're gonna be left out because those are the oversensitive would come at a great cost and a consequence. Why? Under our paradigm, now we get an opportunity to normalize themselves, to be a part of society. Even if something particularly offends you, just go out and talk to them. If you think there are problems, just have dress code at work, ladies and gentlemen. Just tell them that we are not gonna don't wear a shirt with a sexist shirt. You don't need to publicly shame that particular individual. Now you're removing an incident opportunity to even have an intellectual conversation that would happen under their paradigm and would further eliminate women and alienate them in society. That's a particular harm that shaming has brought to them. Only by that one particular harm, we are already winning this debate, ladies and gentlemen, right? Well, let's look at the first argument. After this, I'm going to take one, right? Well, let's look at the first argument this way, right? We think the perception of feminist movement is something important. Now, we have the perception of feminist movement is that movement that is overly broad, they're only catered to successful women, and they are, ladies and gentlemen, they're man-hating particularity. That's specifically problematic. Because now when we look at the feminist movement, they're using the same tool and the same principle that patriarchy has been using for all these years. Why? What they did, they exactly objectified that particular man. That's the same thing that they have been fighting, ladies and gentlemen. Regardless of the value that particular man has, we undervalued him, ladies and gentlemen. Regardless of his character, regardless of his contribution, and regardless of his achievement. Now they are using the same tool that patriarchy has been using to all these years. That's a principal inconsistency that we cannot afford at this particular moment of time. Why? Because now you empower the rhetoric. The feminist movement is a self-serving organization. It's an organization that is oversensitive. We shouldn't care about what they say because they would react and overreact in every particular instance, ladies and gentlemen. Now you empower the rhetoric for the patriarchal man. Why they get to be the objectified man and we don't get to objectify woman? If you principally concede that objectification is okay, now let's everybody objectify, ladies and gentlemen. That's something that we shouldn't do. Especially when you brought that man to tears, that was something that was bad. But why is that particularly bad thing? The moment that you create an oversensitive feminist movement, now any other concerns that would bring up, people would care less about that because they would overreact to every single particular incident that happens. If they are unhappy about the smallest thing, now they raise their voice. See, protest is unique and protest is good and effective because it's unique. But if you do it every other day, it becomes normal. So the effect in the society is going to be less. You have to use the opportunity of protest in limited circumstances, not overuse it at every single petty issue, ladies and gentlemen. So when it comes to more important things, they're going to be hard. Opening.
Was what he did wrong despite all his accomplishments, and did he deserve to get pointed out that what he did was sexist?
See, he was wrong, right? He come here and tell you that the debate is about the degree of attitude and the degree of punishment. And then he asks a few either, was it wrong? Was it wrong? So now he's refusing the debate that he created. We tell you and we debated for you, the degree of punishment, which was public vilification, was wrong and brought significant harms to you always out of this. Well, let's look at the last argument in this debate. See, What was the shirt that he was wearing? It was like a slutty woman on his shirt, right? That's a sort of demographics and the spectrums that we have been always living on from the feminist movement. Why? Because feminist movement, it has never been about fighting for women. It has always been about fighting for the successful woman, ladies and gentlemen. Now, by pointing out the fact that because that guy was wearing a shirt with a slutty character on his shirt, now you are further antagonizing the people and the women who wear those slutty shirts. You are telling them that they are the stigma, they are the problem that we have, and whoever tries to have a portrayal and indication on them in society brings harm to them. That's a sort of significant harm you bring to your own members, ladies and gentlemen. Now the reason we hated that shirt, it wasn't because it was sexist. No, it was because it didn't fit in the dominant culture, the way that we want to perceive women, ladies and gentlemen. That's more shameful. That's a significant harm. We are very proud to actually this time in this debate.
Thank you, Council Member. We invite the opposition member, please. You're all men.
This page is sexist.
Mr. Chair, we believe that casual sexism is the worst form of sexism because it is far-reaching and is treated like an accepted culture, like how Behrat explained within his speech. And that is not what we want to propagate for closing opposition. Let's look where this debate actually gone through in the past. We have an opening government who decided to talk about artistic licensing. We'll discuss about that a bit later. We have an opening opposition decides to talk how it discourages people to join the STEM industry. And we have a closing government who spoke about how we are removing the focus. Let's deal with the government badge first. Firstly, let's look at the artistic license I want to talk about. They said that somehow in the past, women are allowed to actually somehow wear bikinis if they want to, and that should be permitted also when men wear clothes actually projecting these ideas on their shirts. We say it's different. Why so? And this is also missing from opening opposition. It's different because when women decide to wear scantily clad clothes, that means they chose to be within that position. But when a man decides to use women as an object to decorate their aesthetics, that means you're using women as only a tool and not treating them as a human being. The harm here is how people project women in the future. That means women cannot be taken seriously in any form. They are merely just a form of aesthetic in comparison. What they're doing is encouraging people to use it. Second of all, they spoke about how somehow the word digger is not censored, etc. We say that as long as there's a propensity of harm, we do not show that there is an actual tangible harm that happens along the line in the future. It's good enough that somebody might be offended in general. But they say that, wait, now we are imposing values to people. We say it's a good thing, and we always do this in the past. And why exactly we impose values on this occasion? Because there would be a harm on how people perceive the situation in the future. Maybe it's okay to not impose value when it comes to people kissing in public. That's a different thing because we're imposing directly of our moral standards. But when it comes to something that may affect the thinking of other people on how they treat another person, that's where we need to stand in. And that is why we call out bigots when it comes to racism. Here's how we're going to deal with closing government. Firstly, closing government said that we are removing the focus when it comes to the discussion about problems when it comes to feminism. Firstly, it's not mutually exclusive. We can discuss any of it anytime we want. But second of all, when it comes to legislations, etc., not everyone can actually have a say within it. They may discuss it within wherever they want to do amongst their friends, etc., but they can't make any legitimate form of change. So this is another outlet for people who are not within the parliament to have a say on how women are actually projected within society. And the best way to do it is through shaming, through media, because it's much more democratized at the end of the day. Second of all, he spoke about how the mentality of men, they think they will be victimized just because they are born within their gender. First of all, that is the mentality that we want to change. Because even though men do not actively be part of the patriarchy, but to a certain extent, they benefited from being within that position and they use this kind of things. Let's say for a man who would like to apply for a job, he is more likely to be able to get a job. That shows that he benefited from the situation. So when you actively challenge that mentality, that the mentality that you are not a victim, but you're actually part of the situation. That's where men actively want to actually fix the program that they're in and decide not to use such sexy shirts within conferences. And that is how you change the mentality. But before I move on to my extension, yes, Bharat.
Okay, can you please tell us why shaming patriarchy is only exclusive to publicly vilifying Matt Taylor?
No, not just Matt Taylor, anyone who is sexist. But just happens the motion is discussing about Matt Taylor. I'm not so sure what have you been reading there, right? But let's look exactly what I'm going to talk about in my extension. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how shaming Matt Taylor or anyone like him is a cause to be celebrated, because shaming proves that feminism has entered every social strata. And second of all, I'm going to talk about how the acts of prominent figures would influence the mind of young children, and this is the exclusive benefit coming from closing opposition. Firstly, how shaming proves that feminism has entered every social strata. Look, there's a stereotype about feminism that is a white upper class game for women. That means that because policies can be discussed by everyone, but not everyone can make a legitimate change within society, and not everyone can run for politics and pass social legislation. Shaming, on the other hand, is an entirely democratic tool on several different reasons. Because firstly, you have no entry barrier. Second of all, it uses a democratized media. Thirdly, everyone can participate. And lastly, this is really important, shaming has always been a tool used by the lower towards the middle class on how they want to make change within society. Because how social legislations are created is because how society in the first place creates a form of ruckus within a situation, and somehow attention goes to that. That is how we pass legislations concerning the segregation laws, but when Rosa Parks decide to make a ruckus within the bus by sitting in front. So shaming provides a powerful democratized tool for everyone to participate, because firstly, everyone is able to do their part rather than not having a say within it. That's why we should celebrate it, so that more people would actively teach the idea of shaming other people and point at bigots, to make people even more active within the situation rather than continuously being passive within it. Second of all, is that when people on the ground who do not have legitimacy, people who just use Twitter rather than being talking heads on CNN, they are able to get prominent people to admit whether something is sexist or not. That is a form of moral victory for feminism as a whole. Why so? Because firstly, is that you are no longer reliant on a certain group of people within the upper class to actually change, to create any form of change. That means people on the ground are able to democratize their movements, and everyone can be a part of it and are no longer reliant. So that shows feminism is no longer part of the upper class, but something that every single social strata can be a part of and make a change through it. And only that's where you can make social legislation go through, because there is an interest to do so. And the shaming provides that mentality in the first place. Second extension, the act of prominent figures influences the mind of young children. Look, when Matt Taylor admitted that he was wrong and tried to do so, and people associate that with such historical event, like landing a spaceship on a comet, that's where young children would look at that press conference and look on how Matt Taylor do so. So that means now when they actually grow up and decide to be a scientist, how am I supposed to act? It's not how Matt Taylor decides to wear a sexist shirt in a press conference, but I should respect women and be part of the community and be much more willing to allow them to do so. So that is emulated by young children in the future, and that is the generation you want to care about. Shaming is a powerful tool, and it's a tool that is democratized and everyone can participate. We should not be reliant on the upper class just in passing social legislations, but let everyone be a part of feminism. Join us in the fight.
shaming would help me to win this debate, I would gladly scream shame, shame all the time through my bench to get a powerful attention from you, honorable speaker, but clearly it's not the case over here, right? What Behrad actually came and tried to prove you to the debate is many problems that he actually mentioned, like how we're not actually focusing on the main problem, and he asked a really important question, and all the house from this bench actually failed to answer. How does shaming this particular person actually have a tangible benefit that they're trying to talk about? And did it produce any tangible benefit that we can actually say something not to regret about, right? No answers came from this side. It was all about this guy and his shirt and nothing else, right? This is what their whole case was actually tangent about, right? What actually this whole debate boiled down is not really what this guy in the shirt is, but it mostly came about how feminists would actually, utilize their protest. So the main three clashes in the whole debate is how that the debate, how that this is not necessarily solving and proving any benefit, and this is something we should regret about as feminists, being a social movement we should respect and look upon, right? And secondly, that there are other problems to feminists which are also the focusing being shifted, which was clearly not engaged by them properly, right? But clearly, so let's look at what the opposition had to say about it, right? First of all, the opposition came up and they tried to prove to you that how how this guy actually shows the narrative of how the workplace. But I clearly told you to see, public shaming doesn't actually work on how their clothing side actually mentioned, because when you publicly shame something, it's not the only way exclusive to gain attention and pass legislation, right? Because you have many other proper ways. Make a documentary about it. Initialize the whole problem. It's nothing to laugh about, because right now you're a social movement that everybody respects, and you're just pointing at a guy and a shirt and nothing else and saying that, boo, look at that guy wearing this shirt. Also mentioning that they're actually objectifying women in their own way, not engaged by this side. We believe at that moment it's actually a problem, because that shaming does not, what has it actually brought us? We believe to some significant, we can assume that there is something that was indicated, but we believe a documentary or initializing on the main problem and showing examples, that should have worked out better, right? What kind of discourse do we actually have in shaming? Because they clearly prove to us that there are many people actually objectifying women now, because they judge up and they actually have to use shame as a method to pass legislation and to pass something to feminism, right? It's actually under their paradigm that they're actually promoting something bad. But we believe this is a step that could have been taken, right? This is a step that we could have actually taken to actually solve it, because him wearing a sexy shirt, we agree, it can be a problem, right? And we believe something that could have been resolved by applying dress code, but publicly shaming, what has it really done? Did it do any benefit? We believe no, it did not, right? I'll take it later. So when we actually come on the idea of how it works, we also mentioned the idea of that whether this public shaming, what kind of tangible benefits, they did not show us any benefit, right? Let's look at what closing actually brought us on this side, what closing opposition brought us. They actually came up and talked about that, that we actually encourage people to use that objectification. See, that's a problem in society and we accept it. It's not by shaming that one person you can actually solve that problem, because feminists should utilize their protest, as what Behrad says, and should talk and focus on things that are really essentially the problem, right? Because clearly shaming that one person did not change anything, right? And when they actually talk about the whole idea that, shaming is the best way to go, is something we cannot generally accept, because clearly shaming Matt Taylor did not actually prove any benefit, then how is it utilized, right? So before I move on to my second clash, I'll take opening.
Sir, how is a documentary any less publicly vilifying and not causing all the harms that you talked about? Or why is the fact that women now feel more confident going to STEM industries because we called out bigotry and sexism not a benefit that you would consider?
No, see, in the documentary, you address the issues and relate to it, right? But in publicly shaming, you don't address the issue. How many people are actually educated on the problem that's actually existing, that feminism actually wants to show out by publicly shaming someone, right? You don't actually educate people on the problem. You just educate that guy wearing that shirt, right? And just shame that guy. So clearly, no one is actually educated, because now if you log into your social network, everybody's just posting memes about his achievement and why feminism shouldn't make him apologize, right? So clearly it actually showed that people are not properly educated because they're not seeing the bigger picture at hand. So a documentary can be a clear vision for them, right? But so let's move on to my second, no, I won't take any more. So let's move on to my second clash of the house today, right? That what could essentially be the fix that Behrad actually talked about, right? Behrad actually came up and talked about that, that there are actually essentially a lot of problems that have been made, which was clearly not engaged by the other bench, right? That how, this is, they actually objectify women as well, right? Because guess what? This feminism, they strive for a successful woman, right? They actually try to show what a successful woman would be. Maybe if this cartoon was not a slutty woman, but actually someone wearing a lab coat, maybe they would have said that's a successful woman, right? And they would have said nothing about it. But see, they're actually conflicting with their own views, which further regresses the whole idea of feminism, because now people think that, see, they're only aspiring for an objectified class of women within themselves, right? Not talking about the women in general, right? Because clearly when they actually also accept that there were death threats to the person who actually made the shirt, this is how extreme it went, right? So the whole idea of how this actually objectifies women is also there, that Behrad actually talked about, and how that, this, and second main issue that we believe was the most that will actually bring the most significant in the debate was how it normalizes the protest, which they did not engage as well. See, when you actually are an oversensitive social movement and you actually target these things, you are normalized, right? Because you're not effectively using yourself. Behrad clearly talked about the dominant narrative that you're actually making of feminism, right? And now that you're normalizing your protest, the so-called political, the idea of passing legislation would not even happen, because your whole protest is now normalized, and everybody go like, oh, they're ranting again. Let's not care about it anymore, right? Because they're already normalizing society and they cannot prove anything as well. So we believe it's something that we should take into consideration, and thanks to the lack of engagement, we clearly win this debate.
Thank you, the last debate, we invite the opposition.
When closing government comes up here and says that the feminist movement is an oversensitive movement, that's why they keep on ranting, we think that that's a very harmful line to take, especially the way you view feminist movements. We find that extremely offensive, Mr. Speaker. Let's deal with a couple of things. My first issue will be with regards to whether the feminists have a right to be angry. Secondly, I'll tell you why shaming does have a form of benefits, engaging with the things that Behrad wanted us to prove, right? But let's deal with a couple of things that Behrad and his and Whip said, right? Firstly, they wanted us to immediately say that, fighting against Matt Taylor won't solve any of these problems, any of feminism problems as a whole. Yeah, we concede to that, because essentially shaming one person is not going to fix everything else, Mr. Speaker. But it's not mutually exclusive across the board, Mr. Speaker. We think that if you shame Matt Taylor, you can still also fight for things like inequality, breaking down patriarchal structures, and whatnot, Mr. Speaker. But will shaming solve all these problems? Probably no, but it still shows a public perception, and it still spreads that objectification of women on all forms, in all media, Mr. Speaker, is still wrong, Mr. Speaker. And that is a moral victory on the side of the feminist movements, right? And then his main contention was that feminist movements are focused only on the working woman class, Mr. Speaker. But this is ignoring the nuances that was brought on Terence's speech. That we're okay if a woman chooses and opts to portray herself and exercise her right of choice, Mr. Speaker. But when a man uses women in scantily dressed outfits, or when a man puts on a picture of a naked woman to boost his own likability, or to boost to appear, make himself appear interesting, making that woman look as a tool to improve his aesthetics, Mr. Speaker, we think that that's objectification to its very core, and that's something that women across all the board should fight against, Mr. Speaker. So we think that doesn't just cater to a single woman. In fact, we cater to a singular narrative that objectification is in fact bad, Mr. Speaker. So in status quo, even Behrad said that a significant portion of women think that objectification is wrong. We think in status quo right now, you have things like, if that means Behrad only against a particular class making noise, Mr. Speaker. So if everyone was against objectification, and which has already been seen, Mr. Speaker, then it should be okay with us publicly shaming Matt Taylor. Because if then there's no noise, then what about the people who do feel obsessed
upset about objectification, Mr. Speaker? Do men then treat them as a silent form of acceptance, making it as if we can casually just objectify women, Mr. Speaker? And we think that's wrong. Secondly, Berat also says that people will now vilify against feminist groups, but there's a huge logical leap on his part, Mr. Speaker. We think that women have been the victims before this, Mr. Speaker, victims of public perception, Mr. Speaker. So right now what happens is that they're defending their own standing in situation, because we think it's very hypocritical for men to come up here and say that, look, we're for women's rights, we want to fight for equality, but still in a public airwave immediately chooses to objectify women. Note that they've all acknowledged that the act was objectification in its essence, Mr. Speaker. So we don't think that women should immediately just take that in jest, Mr. Speaker, because on one hand, men say that we're fighting for women's rights as much as you are, but on another hand, we can casually make fun of you and immediately let it spread everywhere, Mr. Speaker. We think that there has to be a counterbalance to that, Mr. Speaker, and we do that on our side. Sit down. Firstly, let's talk about the issue whether feminists have the right to be angry. Because while opening opposition said that when we opt in, there's consent when we walked into things like Jimmy Carr, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about art, Mr. Speaker. There's an even greater harm where we're talking about what happened in the instance of Matt Taylor, Mr. Speaker. We tell you the harm that happens under their side is that you cannot opt out of this of this thing, Mr. Speaker, because it pervades into every social spectrum, Mr. Speaker. It's on things like the news. The picture of the shirt will be on newspapers and on the internet. So because it pervades into every system, Mr. Speaker, no single woman is excluded from it, Mr. Speaker. So if you feel objectified by a man making a joke in a comedy show about rape and you think that that's offensive, you can always walk out, or you can choose not to attend that show, Mr. Speaker. But when it's publicly displayed on the airwaves, you will be exposed to that form of objectification, or you'll be exposed to that form of harm no matter what. So that's something to agree about, Mr. Speaker. But what are the harms coming from this, Mr. Speaker? What are the harms, Mr. Speaker? We told you on the first harm, it disrupts the momentum of the feminist movement, Mr. Speaker, because there is a voice against objectification. And if this voice isn't heard, then it appears to be inconsistent, Mr. Speaker. But the Terence's extension, there was never engaged on, Speaker. We think that there's also a harm when you talk about children, Mr. Speaker, because children essentially look into the skies and look at this as a real hero, an American hero that went out of space and and created a major scientific discovery, Mr. Speaker. And the problem is when children are in their formative years and when they don't have a predisposition towards what a feminist movement is yet, how we treat women, Mr. Speaker, the immediate image of a person being able to show a scantily dressed woman on himself, treating that woman as an object to boost his likability and his aesthetic, Mr. Speaker, is something that can pervade into the minds of these children and form that opinion that yes, women can be treated like that. I can show a picture of a bikini dress, a woman dressed in a bikini, in school or whatever, Mr. Speaker. So we think that that's a major harming children. But secondly, it also perpetuates the idea of casual sexism, Mr. Speaker. And we think this is wrong. We don't think that women should take these things in jest, because if you think objectification is wrong, then you can no longer say in casual conversations that you shouldn't have said that joke. It's mean, Mr. Speaker. We think that we should shift discourse in this sense, Mr. Speaker. Before I move on, closing, yeah.
Okay, see, here are the actual problems that children are educated about. Income inequality, working environment. Why do we need to use our protest capital and the degree of focus only in this particular petty secondary issue, but not use all our focus
in
actual problems?
Look, there's a difference, because children don't read about things like legislation fighting against inequality, but when you publicly shame a hero that they think is a hero, Mr. Speaker, then it pervades into their life as it is when they watch TV, Mr. Speaker. So they do learn that treating women as objects is wrong. Let's move on to the second issue. Why shaming is good, Mr. Speaker. We think in status quo, there's already a precedence where it sparks a moral victory, Mr. Speaker. In football, Richard Keys and Andy Gray passed on a sexist remark about a female linesman, and they were sacked and publicly shamed. So what happened then, Mr. Speaker, it sparked the discourse and created an impetus for more women to join in football as linesmen, Mr. Speaker. So we think there's a precedence and a spark of moral victory in this sense, Mr. Speaker. But we also told you in Terence's speech, not engaged, Mr. Speaker, by closing government, that shaming is a publicly used tool that we use in all instances, Mr. Speaker. Where we're unhappy with government official, we go to the media and shame his name, Mr. Speaker, or we tell people they were unhappy with his policies, because it's the most accessible means for us to create this public change, Mr. Speaker. Essentially, that was never engaged with, Mr. Speaker. And it's important because now the lower class women who don't think that objectification should be taken in jest can finally opt into these structures and can finally create the change that they want to see, Mr. Speaker. We're fighting for women everywhere. Side with us. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah, wait.
Compare